All right, it is 12 o'clock. Welcome to everyone who has joined us today. This is the second event in our Read Your Mind Teen Author Series, brought to you by the Lewiston Public Library, Portland Public Library, and a local bookseller, Print, here in Portland. Read Your Mind is a monthly virtual series focusing on teen mental health and wellness, featuring YA authors and community health experts. Our goal is to explore together the complex and common mental health concerns for teens through the vehicle of teen books. I am Kelly Blue. I'm the teen librarian here at Portland Public Library, and my co-host is the fabulous Harper Chance at Lewiston Public Library. And we'll be running the show for you today behind the scenes. Today's featured book is You Are Enough, Your Guide to Body Image and Eating Disorders Recovery by Jen Petro-Roy. Jen will be interviewed by fellow YA author Kim Savage and joined by our community guest, nutritionist Amy Taylor-Grimm. Before we hear from Kim and Jen, we will meet a local nutritionist, Amy, who supports young people dealing with disordered eating. Amy Taylor-Grimm is the undietitian, and she will tell us why she is here today and how you can contact her and other local resources after the event. We'll also be putting up some slides at the end of the event that have all of the resources that we talk about today mentioned and information about the authors and how to contact folks moving forward. I'm going to give a quick content warning for today's event. We will be talking about eating disorders, disordered eating, weight, and body image. This is why we have asked our community partner to join us. Please feel free to direct your questions to Amy if needed. We'll be collecting questions in the Q&A feature. We also want to encourage audience members to be gentle with themselves and to practice self-care and to leave the webinar if you feel that you need to. You are not going to hurt our feelings. If you or someone you know are in crisis or in need of support, we encourage you to reach out, and we have the crisis lines up here listed, two specifically that are about disordered eating, but also most important, the crisis line, which you can text. That number is here, the main health crisis line, the NAMI main teen tech support line, and the National Youth Crisis Hotline. We will have those resources available again at the end of the program. And for Portland Public School students, I've been asked to remind you that your counselors and social workers are available to you at your schools, and you can reach out to them if you need to talk to them after the event. If you don't know how, reach out to a teacher and ask how you can talk to them. For those watching via Zoom, we will collect your questions, as I said, throughout the conversation using the Q&A feature. For those on Facebook, please feel free to add your questions as comments anytime. And at the end of the presentation, we will have time to do Q&A with all of the presenters. This program will be recorded and used and posted to YouTube in the future. So if you need to leave early or you want to rewatch it, it's going to be available to you on the Lewiston Public Library YouTube and the Portland Public Library YouTube. I'm going to turn things over now to our community partner, Amy Taylor-Grimm.
Hello, I'm Amy Taylor-Grimm, and I'm a registered dietitian in Portland. And I'm also the co-owner of Kaleidoscope Eating Disorders and Diet Recovery Center, where we focus strictly on helping people with eating disorders and disordered eating. So it could be the sort of more well-known eating disorders like restrictive eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and eating disorders that are sort of a mixture of all of those. So people don't tend to fall in one box. People tend to be more sort of like a mixture of those. And so we help people overcome any kind of disordered eating at where I work at the Kaleidoscope Eating Disorders. There's other resources in the community too. There's a resource called the Eating Disorders Association of Maine, and that's at maineatingdisorders.org. And there they have resources in terms of doctors and therapists and other dietitians that can help you or somebody that you know recover from an eating disorder. There's also the New England Eating Disorders Program, which is at Sweetser and Saco, and you can call and have an assessment, and a bunch of different mental health professionals and doctors can sort of tell you if they think you might have a problem or not. Even if you're not sure, they can tell you and sort of like point you in the right direction in terms of treatment, whether that be outpatient or in a program or what have you. The other one is called the Art of Awareness, and that's in South Portland. And they have programs such as like outpatient programs, and they have groups, and they have intensive outpatient, which is like a 3-hour a day type program. So although Maine doesn't have a residential eating disorders program, we do have more than we ever did in terms of treatment. And there's lots of residential eating disorder programs in New England and Massachusetts, and not New York isn't in New England, but in New York and in Vermont and places like that. So if you need help, it's definitely available to you. And if you need to contact me for any questions, my phone number is 205-5505. That's 207. Also, you could email me, amy@kaleidoscopeeatingdisorders.com. And obviously, yes, also contacting a guidance counselor, a nurse at school, or any adult at school can help point you in the right direction for further help if you need it.
Thank you, Amy. And Amy will be back with us in the panel for the Q&A at the end of our presentation. Thank you, Amy. And I do also want to mention that in Jen's book, in the back are a large list of resources of organizations, websites, and things that you can look up and reach out to. There's also information about scholarships if you're unable to pay for some of these resources, and also some free resources. And we'll be sure to mention that again at the end. So now we'll get to the main event. I'm going to introduce our authors, Jen Petro-Roy and Kim Savage. Jen Petro-Roy is a former teen librarian, yay, an obsessive reader and a trivia fanatic. She lives with her husband and her 2 daughters in Massachusetts. She's the author of the novels P.S. I Miss You and Good Enough, and the self-help guide You Are Enough, which is the book we'll be discussing today. Jen is an eating disorder survivor and an advocate for recovery. Jen will be interviewed today by fellow YA author Kim Savage. Kim is the author of 3 critically acclaimed novels, After the Woods, Beautiful Broken Girls, and In Her Skin. Her novels have been published in Spain, Brazil, and Turkey, and have been optioned for a streaming series. For those of you who have not yet read You Are Enough, I'll read you some of the information about the book before we turn things over to the authors. You can find yourself a copy of Jen and Kim's book at your local library, Jen and Kim's books at your local library, of course, or if you're able, you can purchase copies online at printbookstore.com. We do love to support our local independent bookstores, so that's printbookstore.com. So this is a little bit about You Are Enough, the book we're going to be discussing today. This self-help guide for young readers delivers real talk about eating disorders and body image, tools and information for recovery, and suggestions for dealing with the media messages that contribute so much to disordered eating. It is written in an easy to understand and conversational way for young people. But as an adult who has also read it, I really appreciated this book. It's very inclusive, very informative, and I highly recommend it. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jen and Kim for a while, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much, Kelly and Harper and Amy. We appreciate it. Hi, Jen.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Portland and Lewiston, too. I guess I would just start off by saying I write psychological suspense, and I guess my own connection to writing about mental health is really in the research that I've done to create the characters who populate my books who have lived through trauma, to make sure that I'm showing them in an accurate and a credible way, showing how it shaped their personalities and their actions. My novels all begin with the aftermath of an abduction, of an event with 2 sisters, and after a girl went missing, another girl took her identity. On a personal level, I'm a mother to 3 teenagers, and I write books for teens, and I've certainly been touched by disordered eating in my own life. I don't think it would be an overstatement to say that growing up as a young adult in the 80s and the 90s, in the days of Kate Moss and Ally McBeal and Heroin Chic, that among my own friends, disordered eating was the norm. It was prevalent, it was unsurprising, and it was largely overlooked or worked around. All of that is to say that when I'm reading a book as an author and as a parent and as a human, rarely do I feel such an urge to highlight a passage on every single page as I did with You Are Enough. So let's get right into it. Just a quick question off the top in terms of how this book came about, Jen. You were writing your novel, Good Enough, your fictionalized fiction story about a girl with an eating disorder. Did you write this as a companion piece to, did you write You Are Enough, pardon me, as a companion piece, I should say, to Good Enough? And if so, why did you feel like it was an important thing to do?
So I did in a way, actually. So Good Enough was my second novel, and it was the second book in my first book deal. And I knew I wanted to write about eating disorders. As I will discuss, I have had one myself. I've recovered. It was something I've always wanted to write about, and I wanted to write about it for middle schoolers, partially because a lot of the books I had read in the past, both growing up and in my work as a teen librarian, had focused a lot on young adults or college students who were sick and, dealing with disordered eating or a, diagnosed eating disorder. And a lot of those books kind of dealt with the person being in the midst of their disorder, like really struggling. There was a lot of just grittiness. Like there was information about how much they exercised, how much they ate, how much they purged. And there was just so much kind of despair almost. And I really wanted to write a book that dealt with the hope of everything, and how recovery was possible. So in Good Enough, it, deals with a 12-year-old girl whose name is Riley. And she is struggling with an eating disorder. And it kind of starts when she goes to treatment. And even though she is still kind of dealing with this ambiguity about whether or not she wants to recover, and the book kind of really gets into her head. And that's another thing I want to focus on, is kind of what the headspace of someone suffering is like, because I think a lot of people outside that experience don't really understand how the motivation can change basically minute to minute. But I really wanted to kind of showcase this journey of her going through recovery and ending up in this space of hope, kind of following that journey rather than the dive down into the illness itself. So while I was writing, and, in Good Enough, Riley's journey was, a lot of it was, Riley's definitely her own person, but a lot of her struggles and thoughts were based on ones that I remembered I had. And I went through a lot of my old journals in the process, which was really interesting. But I kind of had this thought that, I was wanting to write this book for middle schoolers that was hopeful and, dealt a lot with the pressures at that age group. And I thought about how there really weren't a lot of resources nonfiction wise for that age group, at least at that point. I had read a lot, geared toward college students or young adults, or, even adults dealing with eating disorders, or books that were written toward a parent of someone struggling. And I wanted to make sure there was, a book out there that had to do with the, the middle school, young adult, high school age group, about, the different struggles that they can get into. Because it's just, the prevalence of eating disorders is just rising as the age it begins is dropping. In my research, I found that kids as young as, age 6 are starting to go on diets. There are treatment centers that start for children at age 9. And I wanted to be able to talk about how, this struggle is for all ages and the different struggles you can run into at that age. So I wrote a proposal and sent it to my agent, who sent it to my editor, for kind of a nonfiction companion book, which could obviously be read on its own, but could also be kind of read along with the book. And they liked it. And actually, Good Enough and You're Enough were released on the same day, which was really interesting because I kind of had to bounce back and forth between edits on one and then edits on another. But it was a really nice experience because I got to kind of deal with the topic in a different way for both books, which was kind of a really great experience to talk, kind of dive into the fictional world of a character, and then kind of focus on, how recovery is approached in the real world as well.
I think you just scratched the itch of all the people who like to know the behind the scenes of too, because and I know that it can be a mystery. That's incredibly cool. You spoke quite a bit about the audience and writing intentionally to a specific audience that didn't seem to have the resources that this book provides. I want to talk a little bit about the voice. I mean, it strikes me as really conversational. Some words are italicized to sort of emphasize the way someone speaks. I can hear you. I had never heard your voice. We had never met, but I can hear your voice through the story. And it really feels like, especially in the beginning, that you're trying to be very careful not to come from a didactic place. Can you speak to that a little bit? Was that intentional? And
It
then,
absolutely was. Yeah. I didn't want to be the preachy person who was saying, okay, this is what an eating disorder is, and this is what you have to do to recover. Because I mean, I know more than anyone that that's basically not how it is. I mean, recovery is really hard. It took me, I'd say, a good 10 years total to get to a place of full recovery, maybe 3 years in treatment programs, but then the rest of it was just kind of work I had to do on my own. And I knew that recovery took a while, and it wasn't so easy as, read this book and you're better. And I kind of wanted to be able to talk to the audience and say, I know this is hard, but there are a lot of aspects to this. And, going back and forth with my editor was really wonderful. She is queer, and the editor who worked with me on it herself, she's queer. She had disordered eating herself when she was younger. So we really worked our hardest to make sure it was really inclusive for all different types of disordered eatings, for all types of audiences. I wanted to make sure that I was covering people who were trans and non-binary and who have been dealing with chronic illnesses. Not just, granted, I am a cis white female, but I didn't want to write the book toward that audience because there's so much media out there directed toward that audience. And I wanted to make sure that, whoever was reading it knew that this was directed toward them, especially people who are also recovering in larger bodies. Because I think that's something that's so ignored, is that, you don't have to be in a small body to have an eating disorder, whether it's anorexia or bulimia or binge eating. Like, any person of any size can have a restrictive eating disorder. Even if they're larger, they can still be eating not enough than their body needs. They can be eating in a way that is making them unhappy or their life disordered. And I really want to talk about that, how people of any size, of any gender, any circumstance, how poverty can get caught up in that. And I just wanted to kind of say, like, I've been there, I know what it's like, but it's possible, and just kind of weave everything through that in that way.
yeah, along those lines, I thank you, by the way, for writing such an inclusive book. We spoke a little bit before this started about how much I just, on a personal level, appreciated you touching on chronic disease, because I haven't read much about chronic disease in a relationship to disordered eating. It makes a lot of sense when you've got sort of a specialized relationship with food, how something like that can evolve. So a personal perspective, I thank you on that. I wonder, in your research of different perspectives, what surprised you the most? Like, was there one thing? Was there a statistic or a personal story, an anecdote, something like that you came across that really surprised you?
I think, one of the things that I was really surprised at, was how many people were willing to be interviewed. Of course they were. I was glad you asked me to come today. So, and everyone wants to talk about this, but I spoke to, the head of the Males Get Eating Disorders, I think it was Males Get Eating Disorders 2 Association. The website is in the back of the book, but, just the way he was talking about how common it is. And I obviously knew it was common with males, but, just, it's not, because so many, even nowadays, we're, 2021, the images you still see are of women, but, males are getting eating disorders, and it's not just because they want to be, be jacked, basically, it's not necessarily that, there are also males who are worried about being too big. And I think just the variety of stories that I heard was fascinating. Just realizing how, even if there's something really small, like, if it's a behavior, like, going on a diet, or just thinking about what you eat and eating in a certain routine every day, if that's causing you distress, like, that is still something you can change. And I think that's the biggest message I got, through talking to everyone, is that we live in such a culture that thinks that so much is normal. It's normal to go on a diet. It's normal to follow this new plan, or, get this new diet app. And it's so abnormal to push back against that and say, no, I'm okay with the way I look, or, I want to change in a way that has positive ramifications for my life. Like, I don't care if I get bigger. I don't care if my body changes. And I think just realizing that how pervasive this message is in our society of, you should change, you should be better. You should, buy this or do this to be better. And, I definitely believe that eating disorders are a combination of, genetic and, biology and, your environment, but just how strange it still is to push back against those messages of, change yourself is. And it was just really refreshing to talk to a lot of people, whatever gender, whatever size, whatever thing they're dealing with, who are starting to realize or had realized that, it's okay to be yourself and that's all right. And that was just a really nice experience when I was researching.
Well, especially right now, right? And I swear I'll stop nodding. I can't stop nodding.
It's okay.
The equivalent of me highlighting pages. It's just all so true and so good to hear someone say. Don't you think we live in such glamorous times right now? I mean, you call it selfie culture, I think, in the book. But you also make no attempt to hide sort of the ugliness of the disease and also the cure. I was really struck by the passages where you talk about sort of the pains and the discomforts of refeeding, the whole process of being cured. Were you worried at all about scaring your readers when you were including those true experiences?
I mean, I wanted to make sure that I didn't make recovery sound scary, because honestly, staying sick is worse than anything that recovery can be. But I also wanted to reassure people that, if recovering is hard, like, you're not doing it wrong. It's like, if you are feeling really bloated, or if, your stomach might hurt after you eat, or, if you're, psychologically, anxious, that is very normal. And I think that's important to know, is that as you're going through recovery, you're going to be stressed out, you're going to feel bad, and it happens. And I think it's important to know that, that's only for a period of time though, and that it will pass. And for me, at least when I was, sick, that was reassuring, to know that, everyone else in this place, this treatment center that I'm in, or everyone else dealing with this, is going through this, and it will be over. And there's also a difference between, eating more, if you are restricting and you decide to, you're eating more under the, advice of a nutritionist, and you're being, following your meal plan, or, doing everything you're supposed to do and feeling bloated or feeling full. There's a difference between that. And also there's something called refeeding syndrome, which is when someone is really medically, at a very low weight. And if they eat too much, it can actually overwhelm their system and, harm their electrolytes and their system altogether. And I'm sure Amy can talk more about that, but I want to make sure to distinguish between that, that there is a difference between just kind of feeling gross, which sometimes is just psychological. And also, there are medical dangers that at some point you do have to be, monitored by a professional. So I think it's just, it was a balance between saying, this is hard, but it will get better. I remember when I was sick, someone had said to me, I think some treatment person or other, I don't remember who it was, but I remember the words, and they said, why don't you try to get better? Do what you're supposed to do for a few months. And then if you don't like it, if you don't like being recovered, you can always be sick again. And it sounds weird in a way, but like they said, I've never met anyone who chose to be sick again. And it was really true, because like, it is hard, but getting through that, get to the other side, if you don't like it, you can go back, but no one ever wants to. So that was kind of the message I also kind of wanted to get across, that it's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. We were speaking a little bit about sort of the accessibility of this book too, where it's perfect for its audience, but also parents can read it, and it's a great, fast, incredibly helpful read. And I'm wondering, I'm especially interested in the complicity of parents, and maybe that's a strong word, but in particular, the constant positive feedback loops that you talk about in the book and the negative effects of those in some families, that dynamic, and then you give them the tools to deal in the book. I'm wondering what kind of feedback you've gotten from parents about the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely, at a signing I actually had a mother come up to me and say that her daughter was in treatment and she had bought the books for her daughter. And she said that they had helped her like so much and helped her and her daughter. And, comments like that just make my heart grow 3 sizes. But it's really, it's interesting. I mean, you said the word complicit. Like, I definitely never would say that, someone's
That was my word.
complicit.
Yeah,
No, I'm trying, because it's an interesting word, because you hear it a lot and I understand exactly what you're going for. Like, because I think it has to do with dynamics. There are a lot of family dynamics and interpersonal dynamics that can, cause any sort of situation in a family. And I think that's why communication is so important and why it's so hard for a lot of people to recover if they don't have that communication or don't have a supportive family, which is why I think it's so important to be able to find, someone you can talk to, whether it's a trusted friend or a family member, or finding a treatment professional who you can, be able to talk about your fears with. Because, a lot of the times families are doing things that, may make recovery more difficult for someone. There may be parents who are on diets, parents who maybe are in larger bodies and don't like it and may make, comments about things, that may not be helpful to someone in recovery. There sometimes parents may not be willing to listen. But, I think that family therapy, if it's ever an option, can help to talk about how communication can, can do better. I know when I was sick, my parents at some points, they, tended to be what they called like the food police, and they were always watching what I ate and trying to add more to it. And, why it was good intentions, of course, but it really kind of messed with me feeling in charge of what I was doing, and, felt like I didn't have that trust that I needed to develop both in them and in myself to kind of go forward. Because, as you grow up, your parents aren't always going to be around and you have to be able to do things for yourself. So it's just kind of, I think, finding that balance. And I think it's important for parents sometimes to read or, hear that, their kids do need to do this for themselves eventually. But they're also such a critical part of the process at first too. But, there are a lot of, therapy models, family-based therapy, when, parents, especially when kids are really deep into their eating disorder and they really can't physically feed themselves, just having the parents kind of take control of it. So I think it's just kind of a conversation about what stage someone's in and what they need. But, if a family is supportive and, the people who do have that are, incredibly lucky, it's wonderful, for parents to realize that it's a disease. And I think that's something that a lot of people and family members may not realize, that, it's absolutely a person's choice, whether to put food in their mouth, whether to purge, whether to exercise, whether to do whatever. It is a choice someone is making, and you often hear that blaming, like, you're choosing to do this, you're choosing to be sick. Why are you doing this? But it's not that simple, because I think a lot of people don't realize what goes on in someone's brain. Just like when someone's depressed, you can't just say, be happy, think of something happy and be happy. It's really hard to kind of just flip that switch and say, okay, I'm not afraid of this anymore, because there's so much bound up in it. Like, someone's not necessarily afraid of food. They're not necessarily afraid of weight. And it feels like that in the moment. But a lot of it is, for me, when I was sick, a lot of it was, I was really afraid of the future. I was really afraid that when I grew up, I wouldn't kind of fulfill my potential almost. Like, I was really afraid that I would grow up and I would just be a failure. And I was really afraid of failing. And this was kind of my way to be in control of something and succeed at something. And giving that up would mean that I would have to kind of face that I would have to do things on my own without this crutch. And it took a lot of therapy to realize that. But there's a lot bound up in it. And I think parents need to realize that it's not just necessarily, eat this cookie, but there are a lot of strings that have to be unraveled.
Right. And I put this in the lap of the parents, but I'm thinking I should have said adults because certainly there's a lot of value in other folks like coaches being aware of looking out for the signs and what they might say that could send somebody down the wrong path. But you do
Yeah.
all of that in the book, and it's so refreshing. It's really
Yeah, especially I think since kids are getting so into sports at such a young age now. Actually, I have a book coming out in 3 weeks called Life in the Balance, and it's about a competitive softball player. It has nothing to do with disordered eating, but she's kind of dealing with balancing this increasingly tough travel, wanting to be on a travel team, and how it's sports are just kind of becoming so much more competitive now. And I think, at a young age, if people are starting to focus on, I need to be good at this, and if coaches are commenting on their body or their times or this or that, ballerinas, and, it's difficult, I think, and especially in so many areas.
Yes. Yes. I do want to make sure that I know we're probably getting close on time, that I mentioned the obvious. You wrote this in 2019. This has been a heck of a year. It was yeah. A few months ago, the CDC came out with a report about the rise in hospital visits. I'm sure you're up to date on all of this, of course, but I think it was between April and October of last year, hospitals across the US saw something like a 24% increase in mental health emergency visits for kids. And those are the young kids. I think that was between 5 and 11. And then there was an even higher increase for kids between the ages of 12 and 17. So proportionally, we all know that mental health visits to hospitals are higher than before. Have you given any thought to how you might change or maybe add to what you've already written in light of this very, very strange year? Macmillan, are you listening?
I haven't, but actually that's a really
paperback.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I noticed myself, like I have my 9-year-old daughter, and she was really struggling in the spring, just being away from her friends. She's a huge extrovert. And she was having a really rough time and having some really sad moments, just kind of being away. And I think, especially for kids and teenagers who are predisposed to anxiety or to, maladaptive coping mechanisms, this really was a powder keg. You're stuck at home, especially if, your family situation or your house situation is something that exacerbates your anxiety. You don't have a routine. For me, when I was recovering, I remember having a routine was so important. I knew I had meals at this time. I knew I had to be somewhere at a certain point. So if I was tempted to, exercise, which was one of my difficulties in recovering, I knew I didn't do that because I had to go to my job, and it was like there were barriers in place to stop me from certain behaviors, because until I could get strong enough to do that on my own, and until I, got strong enough not to have those urges anymore. But there's no routine anymore. And, the world has felt like it was falling apart. Hopefully there's a little bit of hope now. But yeah, I have a friend who was struggling a lot more during quarantine. And she was mentioning to me that, she was thinking about going into a treatment program, but everything was just booked solid. So it's sad. I'm glad there's support out there for people. Absolutely. But, it's hard when all these, the structures that you're used to go away, which is why it's, it's just so important that, people reach out to, nutritionists like Amy, or, if they have therapists or someone to talk to. And, I think that as awful as it's been, being on Zoom all the time, it's nice to be able to have that social contact when it's possible. But I think, it's a hard time, I think, for people, with mental health issues right now.
Yeah. Just one last question, sort of writer to writer. I know your next book, you said, is about sports. It sounds like it's about sort of the intensity, perhaps, around sports right now in some sense. But I wondered if, I know I'm always writing about the same thing. I'm always writing about, we all are. Same. Every story is different, but I'm always writing about female friendships that supersede the romantic in girls' lives. That's my story.
I love that.
Yeah, well, I can't stop writing about it. But I wonder if this will always be your story in some sense, that you will keep writing. Whether it
I've realized that I do gravitate toward kind of my theme is kind of realizing, honestly, it actually is like you are enough. my debut book, P.S. I Miss You, was is written in letters, and it was about a girl kind of struggling to come to terms with her sexuality, realizing she had a crush on a girl, while also kind of realizing that she may not believe some of the same things religion-wise as her parents did. My second book, Good Enough, dealt with a girl recovering from an eating disorder. And Life in the Balance, which is out February 16th, it's about a girl, her name's Veronica, and she has been playing competitive softball all her life, and is finally old enough to try out for the travel team in her town. But at the same time, her mother actually tells her that she's going into rehab for her alcoholism. And because it's so expensive, she may not have the money to sign up for the travel team with all the fees. So she decides that she is going to try out for the school talent show and see if she can win some money. And in the process, finds out that she really likes singing and is wondering whether she should kind of put all of her efforts towards softball anymore, or in the process, same as her mom, she can try to find, balance, life in the balance. But I've found that I just really gravitate toward, kids trying to realize who they are, whether in relationship to the world or to other people, and complicated family relationships too, somehow.
I hear you. Well, readers are better for it. I think it probably makes sense to open this up to questions. Kelly and Harper, do you think it's time to do that?
Back. Hello. Yes, we can open up to questions from the audience now. So if anyone has any, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box or on Facebook. If you have any, you can just comment them and we'll read them aloud. And Amy, if you want to come back, you're welcome to I think we'll probably have some questions from. There she is. I think Kelly has something, yes, she wanted to ask while we started.
I don't, if it gets things rolling, I don't know if it's really a question so much as a comment from somebody who read You Are Enough, but some of the messages that I think it's so important that you covered, and maybe you all can touch on this. I think a lot of people think you have to be like definition bulimic or anorexic to have disordered eating. And so a lot of people can struggle for many years, but think they're not sick enough, or that they don't need help because they're not textbook or binary. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, because I think a lot of people they suffer much longer than they need to, because they don't meet the part. So maybe it's more about, and you touched on this a little, the stereotypes that society has about who has an eating disorder, who can have one. So I was wondering if you all can talk about that.
Anyone can. I remember when I was in treatment way back, in the day, I was in treatment with a woman, I was like 18, and I was, there was like a 50-something-year-old woman in there with me. And I remember being absolutely shocked because I did not know at that point that it was like, I'm like, isn't this something that only kids get when they're younger? And because that's all I had ever seen or read or heard about. And I remember that really just made me think. I was like, well, I don't want to be dealing with this, my whole life. And, because I know that, people can do that, especially when they get stuck in that, that fear of admitting, I think there's such a fear of admitting you have a disorder or you have struggles with eating to start with, because even though, like Kim was saying, so many people deal with this, and you see it so often and you hear about it in the media, but I think it's different sometimes to say, well, I struggle with this, I'm not perfect. I'm vulnerable and I'm going to admit it. And I need help. And I think it's even harder when you don't necessarily fit in that mold. If you're a male, maybe, you have people saying you're weak or you're not masculine. If you're non-binary, you may fit in, kind of get stuck, like what ideal am I supposed to fulfill? And I think people, so for sometimes, if someone's trans and, they're already dealing with discomfort about the body, they were born into, there's so much else kind of wound up in that, fitting some some image when, there's already a lot going on there as well. If you're not meeting, I have a whole chapter on how stupid BMI is. It was basically, created to, I think, for like just basically talking about the population itself as a descriptor, and by a white man, and for somehow it got wound up in health. And if you're not a BMI of a certain number, I try to avoid numbers whenever I can, but if you're not a BMI of a certain number, you can't get diagnosed. If you're not sick enough, you can't get treatment. So I think it's hard because people say, well, I'm not sick enough, so I guess that means I'm not that, so I don't need to seek help, and I'm just going to go on being miserable. Or else they say, well, I'm not sick enough, so I'm just going to make myself sicker so I can get treatment. So I think there's really two different paths there, and both of them are awful. When in reality, it's, why don't you just, if so many people are dealing with this in society, and we know that, I just wish it was more freeing for people to just say, I'm struggling with this, and it's okay. And, let's just get the help I need. And I think that's why I try to speak openly about what I went through, and, if I, every once in a while I wake up and I have a bad body image day. And, I think that's normal, especially, even if you're recovered. Like if you live in the society, I think sometimes, if you wake up and, depending on, what's going on, if, maybe you had a lot to eat last night, so you just kind of feel full and gross, and that's okay, and it'll pass. And I think there just needs to be so much more openness about the variety of human experience, and so that people can access treatment and admit to it if they need to. Especially if it's affecting your quality of life. I mean, even if you only say you exhibit a behavior a few times a week, if that's making you miserable and making you feel bad about yourself all the time, I would say that's worth looking for help, even if you don't fit any textbook definition.
I think along the lines of that, I'd like to, I love that you talked, Jen and Kim, a little bit about how during COVID times, especially the lack of routine can be really, really difficult and damaging when dealing with mental health, but disordered eating especially. I know that that is a significant thing. And I also really loved in the back of You Are Enough, you have so many resources listed, Jen, that are helpful, and also helpful for people who maybe don't have traditional healthcare access or finances to go into these sorts of things. I wonder if you and maybe Amy could speak a little bit to some of the options people have who may not be able to afford traditional healthcare when dealing with.
I think Amy's probably better, because I'm sure she can get more updated ones, given that this was published a few years ago. But for me, at least, when I went through treatment, it was expensive. And we had to petition my insurance company and go through this process to have them overturn their decision not to cover it. And even then, my parents I was lucky enough that we could afford me going to treatment. And, even therapist appointments are expensive. What if the therapist you click with is out of your network, or, you have to make a decision, like, do I go to this therapist who tells me that I should only recover to a certain point? What if your therapist tells you to, says something harmful, and she's, less expensive, and then the one who helps you is more expensive. And it's just so sad, the state of healthcare, that, people have to make these decisions, which is, I think, why, it's important that there are, there are support groups online. There are, we were talking earlier, there are podcasts you can listen to that are body positive, and, books you can read, and websites you can go to. And I mean, Amy, is there anything specific you have found that's, of, sliding scale or cheaper that could be helpful?
Well, two of the resources you had in the back of the book, I wanted to say I've had really good luck with some of my clients. Project Heal not only helps people find treatment, but they really coordinate for you for free. So I've had some clients who just, don't have any insurance, or they have an insurance that doesn't cover it, and they'll help them it's called a single case agreement, which I'm sure you've heard of, where it's sort of like, it's not covered in this state, but we'll help you get an agreement to have your treatment covered in this other state, or even though your insurance doesn't cover it, we'll help you work with them to make some sort of financial arrangement. So Project Heal has been amazing. And also the Kirsten Haglund Foundation you had in there too, which is, I think she's a former Miss America who struggled with an eating disorder, and they will give scholarships and grants. I've had a couple of clients use that too. So they'll give you actual money to be able to go to treatment, or to even do outpatient treatment if you don't have resources to do that. I have found the podcast to be so helpful because and the one that we were talking about is called Food Psych, the Christy Harrison podcast, because, if you have the resources to have a phone, they're kind of right at your fingertips and they're free. And, it's kind of like some of them are therapists, some of them aren't, but they're sort of like a therapy session. Obviously they're not talking to you, but it's just such good information.
One thing that I also tell people a lot is that, especially, I know a lot of teens and middle schoolers are on Instagram. And I think that sometimes that can get really tricky is by, you're always looking at your friends and they're, if they're on Snapchat, they're in a filter, or, they're on Instagram, they're posed with a specific light, and, everyone looks so great. And I think it's really important to diversify your Instagram feed. I have some resources I can send to Kelly and Harper as well, like accounts you can follow, but there are a lot of just really fat positive and body positive feeds that you can find, whether they post affirmations or just people in larger bodies, just kind of enjoying their lives. And I find that that's really helpful. Just to kind of, as you're scrolling through Instagram, you're not just seeing your friends posting these images of, everything wonderful going on. They're not necessarily going on vacations now, hopefully, but like you always see these, posed happy pictures of people, but then you're just see like, oh, here's someone in a larger body, or someone talking about how they're confident with themselves, or, someone, a happy, a positive quote about recovery, and just kind of having that constantly scroll through your feed. And it just becomes so normal, because I think, people in our society, you face even if you're not looking at magazines or like, looking at supermodels, like if you're watching TV, you see people in makeup and in, generally smaller bodies. So it's so nice to get like this just visual representation that, everyone's different, and it's just having it there and be normal.
Thank you
so
both.
Now.
Yeah, I personally, there's so many good social media things we can share with folks after. I think as a follow-up to that, it would be like to have some discussion on like advice for young people who maybe don't have supportive adults in their life and might be navigating this on their own. I know that is a frequent thing. You and Kim talked about it a little bit earlier. Do you have any suggestions for young people who are sort of dealing with families that may not have the best attitudes around body weight and food and size and all that?
I mean, if those families are, willing to, help their kids into, to find a therapist or a nutritionist or, some sort of professional they can talk to, sometimes like a doctor or a teacher or a coach, depending on a relationship you have with someone, I think that can always be a possibility. Someone you can talk to about, or even a friend who's a peer, someone who will be able to listen and tell you they love you, despite what you look like or despite what you're dealing with. And I think it's so important to find those communities, and as awful as sometimes you hear about online being, like with, the selfies and this and that. And, I know there's so many pro eating disorder message boards out there. I mean, I don't think as many now. Everyone, people are cracking down, but the internet is actually really great for support. There are a lot of places you can find communities of people who are, supporting each other or working together toward, a common goal of, pushing back against, diet culture and all that. So I think, being able to find, either an online support group, an in-person support group, there are definitely places out there to reach. And I think as long as you have someone to talk to, I think that's important.
Sometimes it just takes the, like you said, the professional, whether it be the dietitian or the doctor or the therapist pointing it out to the family too, for them to see that, okay, oh, I didn't realize that when I said, oh, I feel fat today, or that was triggering to my child. I've noticed that it's so ingrained in the culture, the diet culture, that the family often is saying things that they don't even realize is, not helpful in terms of this food. Like the biggest one for me is when parents say like, we only eat healthy food in the house. I don't know how this happened. And it's sort of like, well, just that statement implies that there's food that's healthy and good, and then there's food that's like bad and unhealthy, and it makes it into this moralizing of food situation where I'm bad because I'm eating the bad food, that kids and adults too obviously think. And so just pointing that out a lot of the times is super helpful. There's this book called, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, called Help Your Teenager Beat an Eating Disorder. That's really helpful in terms of describing that. The author is Locke, L-O-C-K. I don't think there's an E. Locke and LaGrange are the authors. Helps parents sort of like see what language to use and what language to not use.
Is that the book that's pink?
I think it's white.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
I'm just picturing something. Okay.
There's a book called The Diet Survivor's Handbook that's pink.
Maybe.
Judith Matt. So I use that one quite a bit too.
I'm librarianing it right now.
I know.
Okay, look at tell us if it's pink.
You can tell Kelly and I are typing, trying to find it.
It's super helpful for parents with the language and what to say and what not to say, because again, it's so ingrained in the culture that I think a lot of times they're innocently sort of like saying things that they don't realize are harmful.
Or you heard people say, "Oh, I'm going to have this because I went for a run," or something like
or
that. Or I was so bad today. Yeah, exactly.
Clean food and dirty food. Let's just throw clean food under the bus right now. That movement.
Yes.
The freezing of that.
It.
Yep.
Not the idea of it.
So, right.
You also point out.
I've been watching a ton of the Great British Baking Show over the holidays, and one of the judges always says it's got to be worth the calories, and I yell at her every single time she says that, because it makes me
cringe.
When you read things like this and you start recognizing how much it's all over the television and all over like everything we watch, and that people don't realize how harmful it is.
I have two young daughters, and they're like, "What's calories?" Because they were looking at like the box of something, and I was like, "Oh, it means energy," and they're like, "Oh, cool." I'm like, exactly,
Yeah.
I mean,
Jen, I'm wondering also sorry, Kim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that, part of this too is we were talking about adults in their lives and coaches too, sort of that normalization of playing through pain or playing through injuries. It seems to have a parallel with the discomfort you feel when you're starving, right? Like I can get through this because the goal at the end is such a larger message that they're getting and applying in ways that are scary.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I'm sorry.
My question was also about exercise, and a lot of your book is also about the dual component of over-exercise with the disordered eating, and they don't always go hand in hand, but they often do. It's so hard like to see this is like, but I'm doing something that's good for me, or I'm really good at running, and it makes me feel good, and like society, people say this is great, and that I think there was a quote that where like society sees that movement as a virtue.
Yes.
Or in your book, and I was wondering if you could touch on that. Because the exercise part can be so hard to break away from.
That was my hardest struggle. That was something I had to deal with. Like it took ages because I really enjoyed it. I mean, I grew up in an athletic family. Like I wasn't like super great at anything, but I always, did stuff. And I still enjoy running, and it took me forever to kind of take apart basically using running or exercise as earning something or feeling good about myself. And, I did this, so now I can eat my meal plan. At first it was, I have to do this. And then it was, okay, I have to do this so I can still eat. And it was kind of like, oh, but look I'm still eating. But, I didn't realize or didn't admit for a long time that it was just still so compulsive. And it was something that it was like you said, it was both, I enjoy doing it, you know, I did get endorphins, but those endorphins were also really tied up in like feeling almost superior, weirdly, in a way. And I think a lot of people who are struggling with this because of our culture's messages, that it makes them feel like, oh, I'm awesome. Like, look at what I'm doing for myself. Look how, you know, how I'm doing this and I'm achieving this. And I think it's just really hard because you see like all these people being like, oh, I'm training for a marathon, or look at, I did a triathlon, or I'm going to Pilates, or, you know, this or that. And it's really hard because so many people get congratulated. You know, and people posting on Facebook, you know, I lost all these pounds during quarantine and I'm a new person now. And it's, you know, I've noticed stuff like that. And it's really interesting what society chooses to congratulate, because all you're doing is sweating, you know, and going around in circles. And it's, you know, exercise is great. I still exercise. But honestly, like if I go for a run, I make sure I stop after a certain amount, because if I get in the habit, you know, even though I'm recovered, I notice with myself that if I run a certain amount or over a certain amount, I still get a little twinge of, oh, that's cool. And I never really want to feel that anymore. So like I just stop myself after a certain amount of miles, because I'm like, oh, this is fun. I'm enjoying it. But now I'm done. Like, I know I never want to run a marathon. I never want to train for a marathon. I've done half marathons before. And when I did train for a half marathon, by the end of my training cycle, my brain was starting to go a little weird. And I said, okay, no more. So like, even though I'm recovered, there are still things I know I have to look out for. Like, I know I can never diet. I know I can never train for something. Like, exercise is just, it has to be fun for me. So, and I think that's something, like, I do believe in full recovery. Like, I call myself recovered, but I think it's just kind of like, almost like cancer in a way. Like, I'm still going to do the scans. I'm still going to make sure that there's nothing appearing that I have to watch out for. And I'm not going to do something that I know could lead me down a bad path. So, you know, like I exercise, and, you know, but I also realize that it's just something I do. It's not everything I am, like something I used to believe.
I think you made the case that the book should be required reading in schools.
Oh, thank you.
I'll support that.
I feel like a lot of these books that we're talking about in this series are things that we would love to see more required reading or just encouraged reading among young people. I have a question from the chat that's from someone who says they struggle with weight, but also with things like food allergies and inflammation, and trying to be like a good global citizen and eat the right foods.
Ooh, yeah.
And like they feel like they're at war with food much of the time, and they're wondering how common these kinds of issues are getting entangled with eating disorders.
I think Amy can definitely probably talk about more how common they are, but I definitely think that it's got to be really hard to honor your food allergies, but not feel like you're, you know, you don't want to recover, you don't necessarily want to restrict, but you do have to, if you're allergic to something, you obviously have to do that. And I think when you do get this message, like, don't eat red meat because it hurts the planet, or, you know, eat clean because maybe it's better for, you know, whatever, you know, I think being able to push back against that, maybe eat less red meat. And if you really want a hamburger, one hamburger is not going to kill you. Like, kind of, for me, it's balancing my mental health against, you know, what I think might be helpful for the world. Like, I eat red meat once in a while. I don't eat a ton of it, partially because, you know, I don't super love it, but like, I think it's a balance of what's good for you. Like, in helping the world, are you going to really, is it going to help you to feel at war with yourself? You know, would you be able to help the world better if you weren't so stressed out about food? Like, maybe there's so much more you can do. I think, what's the quote? It's like by Naomi Wolf. It's like, you know, dieting is the biggest political sedative in the world. Basically, like, if you're dieting and you're focused on yourself, how can you help the world? And how can you do what you want to do and, you know, do what's going to help other people? So I think it's kind of just a balance there. If you feel at war and you're miserable, you know, one, whatever you want to eat once in a while really going to harm? But, if you do feel strongly about that, if you want to be a vegetarian, like that's totally fine. But I think it's totally a balance.
Yeah, I think that you sort of have to let go of all of those moral things and recover until you can sort of start dabbling in veganism or vegetarianism or environmentalism. I agree with Jen. You have to take care of yourself first, because otherwise you're not going to be a very good advocate for the animals or the planet. Or if you're preoccupied with, I should do this, but I shouldn't do this. And then also sort of like limiting, separate from the food allergies, limiting certain foods often causes binging, which you're not helping anybody by then going forward and then binging on X, Y, or Z for food because you're limiting it because you feel like guilty that you shouldn't be eating it. So I always say, sort of just kind of let go of it for now, and recover, and then see where you are sort of after that, when you can make those decisions kind of from a more stable place. And I just want to say one other thing about the person that commented or that had the question, is that, struggling with sort of like the antidote for struggling with weight, the person said, is, just your weight's fine. Like there's nothing that you can kind of work on your eating, but every single person can be healthy at whatever weight that they are. So weight has nothing to do with health. 98% of diets fail given 5 years. Initially, people can lose weight, but over time, 98% of people gain the weight back. So stop focusing on the weight and just take care of the things you can control, because weight is not a behavior. So social supports, and, you could increase your fruits and vegetables, but don't ever take things away. I would say if you want to improve your diet overall, you're not, having an eating disorder, disordered eating, you can add stuff, but just don't take stuff away, because that just leads to more disordered eating. You can be healthy at any size.
Yes. Thank you for saying that so explicitly. I feel like we tiptoe around it a lot, but it's what we need. So we're a little bit over time because we all could just talk about this forever, clearly. I have one more comment I just want to read out for Jen from one of our attendees that says they read You Are Enough and it is truly a masterpiece. They haven't struggled with disordered eating, but the book was written in such a way that they were able to interpret it based on their own experience with mental health issues. And the whole section that appears throughout the book about society and the impact society has on adolescents is so true and relatable. And they were really surprised to see someone capture it in a way that could make such sense and can be really easily related to. So,
oh, that means so much. Thank you.
Glowing recommendation for You Are Enough for anyone who wants to read it.
Thank you. And thank you all for having me and for reading. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all for being here.
Me as well.
So that is all the time we have for today. Kelly, if you want to put up the slides one more time, we'll share that information. We'd once again like to thank Kim and Amy and Jen for joining us today, and our co-sponsors at Print Bookstore. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of You Are Enough or any of the other books that we talked about today, they're available on the Print website, and most, if not all of them, are available to borrow through your libraries. For those who are watching on Zoom, I'm going to put up a really quick poll here on the screen. Doop. And if you answer, you'll be entered to win a copy of You Are Enough that we have some free ones to give away. So be sure to answer and we'll contact the winner by email. I'll let that be up for a few more seconds. And also, if you appreciated this conversation, please don't forget to join us for the next session of Read Your Mind, Exploring Mental Health in Teen Books in February next month, where we will be joined by authors Adib Khurram, Mark Oshiro, and Julian Winters for a discussion on how the intersection of masculinity, queerness, and racial and cultural identity can impact teen mental health. The sign-up information is available on both the teen and the PPL and LPL websites. And we will also have free copies of those books to give away as well. So thank you again to everyone for joining us. And if you have any questions or need access to resources, reach out to us at any time. And we will be sharing this recorded video on our social media channels and the slides for anyone who needs any access to resources. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will hopefully see some of you next month.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Panelists.